The phone slipped from my hand and fell to the floor with a thud. The screen still glowed, showing the photo. It was my daughter, Beatrice, dressed as a bride, smiling next to a man I barely knew. "Bea, did you get married?" "Yes, Mom. Yesterday." On the other end of the line, I could hear the sounds of the street. Cars, footsteps, voices, everything but emotion. "Why didn't you tell me? Why wasn't I invited?" "It was a small thing, Mom. Just family." That word hammered in my head. Family. I picked up the phone, stared at that frozen smile on the screen, and understood. Maybe I had become a detail outside the frame, an inconvenient reminder of the past. I deleted the photo. And in the silence that remained, a question formed, a question I still can't answer. What does a mother do when she is no longer a family? What happened after this discovery will shock you. Subscribe to the channel to hear heart-touching stories that reveal secrets about family, love, and dignity that can change your life forever. Because in this story, you will discover that sometimes the greatest love a mother can show is respect for her own dignity. Have you ever been forgotten by someone you loved unconditionally? My name is Rosa Helena Santos. I'm 65 years old. And all my life, I've believed that family is everything. I raised my daughter Beatrice alone after my husband Antonio died of a heart attack at the age of 45. I worked as a housekeeper in 3 different homes here in Belo Horizonte. The Rodriguez family's house in the Savassi neighborhood, the Mendes family's house in Lourdes, and on weekends I did extra cleaning in the Luxemburgo neighborhood, all to pay for her business administration degree at PUC Minas. I saved every penny, every real, so she could have the wedding of her dreams. I always imagined that I would be there, next to her at the altar, holding her hand, watching her realize any woman's biggest dream. But last Tuesday, while I was having breakfast and looking at my phone, I saw a photo on Facebook that changed everything. There was Beatrice, in a white dress, next to her husband, Rodrigo Tavares. The only people with them were his parents, Mr. Marcos and Mrs. Teresa Tavares. My eyes scanned every detail of that image over and over. Beatrice was radiant, smiling like I'd never seen her smile before, and the caption said, "Our special day, complete family." Complete family, without me. There was no invitation, there was no conversation, there was no explanation. I discovered my daughter had gotten married the same way any stranger discovers news on the internet. Have you ever felt like your entire life was erased with a single photo? My heart broke in a way that I hadn't felt like this even when Antonio died. Sitting there in my simple kitchen in the Padre Eustachio neighborhood of Belo Horizonte, with the mug of coffee with milk trembling in my hand, I realized that for Beatrice, I might no longer exist as a mother. Just an inconvenient reminder of the past, a disgrace to his new life. I called her 3 times that day. They all went straight to voicemail. I sent messages pretending I hadn't seen anything, asking if everything was okay, if she needed anything. The answer only came late in the afternoon. "I'm fine, Mom. We'll talk later." We'll talk later, as if his own daughter's wedding were a minor matter that could be postponed. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling of my small room, I realized I had spent my entire life being a mother to someone who no longer needed me. And in that early morning silence, while the neighborhood dogs barked outside, a new Rosa Helena began to awaken within me. A Rose I didn't know. A Rose who had maintained dignity under so much unconditional love. Everything I did for her. In the following days, memories came like strong waves from the sea. I remembered when Beatrice was 5 years old and caught severe pneumonia. I worked all day cleaning the Rodriguez family's house in Savassi, 3 floors, 5 bathrooms, and at night I sewed for the Mendes family in Lourdes. For 15 days, I barely slept 3 hours a night. Taking care of her, nebulizing her in the early morning, taking her to the health center, buying those expensive medications at the pharmacy. When she finally recovered, she hugged me tightly and said in that small, childish voice, "Mom, "When I grow up and get married, you'll be the most beautiful godmother in the world." Those words had lived in my heart for over 20 years, and now they were just empty promises from a child who no longer existed. Have you ever held a promise in your heart for years, only to have it broken without explanation? I also remembered her 15th birthday party. I had saved for 2 whole years to throw an unforgettable party. I sold my wedding ring and some gold earrings Antonio had given me. I worked extra shifts every weekend. I deprived myself of buying new clothes, going to the salon, and eating meat. We rented the party hall at Club Atletico Minero, right there in Pampulha. I bought the most beautiful pink dress I could find on 25 de Marzo Avenue. I hired a DJ who played her favorite songs. I prepared all the Minas Gerais food myself with the help of my friend Aparecida. Black bean stew with pork rinds, chicken with okra, fluffy white rice, crispy farofa, fresh vinaigrette, warm cheese bread that I made in the early hours of the morning, and a 3-tier cake that I ordered from the best bakery in the neighborhood. That day, Beatrice said to me in front of all the guests, "My mom is the best mom in the world. She did all this for me. I will remember her forever." The guests applauded. Some of my friends cried with emotion. Everyone commented that the love was evident in every detail of that party. Have you ever thought about how the most beautiful promises are sometimes the ones that hurt the most later? I thought about the daily sacrifices that no one saw. The mornings I woke up at 4:30 a.m. to make her breakfast before school. French toast with butter, chocolate milk, cornmeal cake that she loved. The afternoons I spent helping with math, Portuguese, and history homework, even though I hadn't even finished 5th grade. The nights I stayed up until 2 a.m., waiting for her to come back when she went out with her friends, sitting in the dark living room, praying rosary after rosary for her to arrive safely. On Sundays, he would take a huge pot of complete feijoada to Aunt Dolores's house in the Cachoeirinha neighborhood, so that Beatrice could spend time with her father's family, who had passed away. When she entered college to study business administration at PUC Minas, I increased my working hours. He cleaned the Rodriguez house from Monday to Friday. On Saturdays, he cleaned 3 different apartments in Luxembourg. On Sundays, he did laundry and ironing. I wanted her to focus solely on her studies, without worrying about money. Every time my knees ached after so many hours of standing, every time my hands cracked from wiping them with bleach and detergent, I thought about the bright future Beatrice would have thanks to her education. Do you have something you did for love, but today it seems to have been in vain? During those college years, she began to change in subtle ways. I no longer came straight home after school. I had group work, extracurricular projects, important meetings. On weekends, I went out with friends to places that were completely foreign to me. Bars in Savassi, expensive restaurants in Pampulha, parties at country houses in Nova Lima. When I asked about her day, her answers got shorter and shorter, more distant. "It was good, Mom. I'll tell you later." But later never came. It was during her senior year of college that she met Rodrigo Tavares. The first time she mentioned his name, I noticed a special light in her eyes. She talked about him nonstop, how smart he was, how he came from a good family, how he had ambitious plans for the future. I was happy to see her happy. But I also felt a pang of something I couldn't quite put my finger on at the time. It was as if Rodrigo represented a world I didn't belong in, a future where there would be no room for a mother who cleaned other people's houses. The dinner that changed everything. The first time Rodrigo came to dinner at my house, I went all out. I made rice with pequi, which I bought specially at the Afonso Pena market, chicken and brown sauce with tender cornmeal, garlic braised collard greens, crispy bacon farofa, crispy pork rinds, and for dessert, a dulce de leche with cheese that I made just the way Antonio liked it. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted him to see that even though we were simple, we had love, tradition, and dignity. Rodrigo was polite and courteous when he arrived, but I noticed his eyes roaming our small house with an expression I couldn't decipher. Have you ever felt judged in your own home? Beatrice seemed nervous. She was constantly explaining things as if she needed to justify our way of life. The house is small, but it is very cozy. The sofa is old, but it has history. It belonged to my father. The paintings are simple, but they have sentimental value. When Rodrigo left, he said with a little smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Your house is very nice, Dona Rosa." But there was something in his tone that made me feel like he had said otherwise. That night, Beatrice told me that I had been too intense, asking too many questions about his family, his work, his plans. "Mom, not everyone is like us, who shares their whole lives in the first conversation." It was the first time I felt like I was being seen as a problem to be solved. From then on, Rodrigo's visits became less and less frequent. When he did come, the conversations were more superficial, more formal. Beatrice began to spend more time with him, returning home later and later. Family gatherings on Sundays, which were sacred, became occasional, then sporadic, until they disappeared completely. "Rodrigo and I have commitments" became the most common phrase in her vocabulary. Have you ever felt like you were slowly losing someone but couldn't do anything to stop it? When Beatrice graduated, I was so proud that I cried throughout the entire ceremony in the PUC auditorium. She had achieved what I never could: finish college. She would have opportunities I never had. After graduation, we celebrated at a fancy restaurant in the Lourdes neighborhood. Rodrigo had also invited his parents, Mr. Marcos and Mrs. Teresa Tavares. It was the first time I met them formally. Mr. Marcos was a manager at a large company in the Belo Horizonte metropolitan region. Mrs. Teresa had been a private school teacher for many years before retiring. They talked about traveling abroad, fancy restaurants, and theater plays in São Paulo. I tried to join the conversation, but I felt like a fish out of water. When I mentioned that I worked cleaning houses, there was an awkward silence that Beatrice quickly filled by changing the subject. That night when we got home, Beatrice said something that hurt me deeply. "Mom, I know you always try to be nice, but sometimes you say things that can be misinterpreted. Rodrigo's parents are very refined people." Refined. That word kept hammering in my head. I wasn't refined. My love, my sacrifice, my dedication didn't count for anything compared to money and formal education. When I became a nuisance. The following months were marked by a growing distance. Beatrice got a job at a large international company. Rodrigo also had a good job. They started talking about getting their own apartment and moving in together. I supported the idea, even though my heart was breaking inside. "Young people need their space," I said, feigning enthusiasm. When they finally moved into an apartment in a gated community in Belvedere, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Belo Horizonte, I was still welcome, but with set schedules and conditions. "Mom, you better call before you come to see if we're home," Beatrice told me. The spontaneity of simply showing up to visit my daughter was gone forever. Now I had to make an appointment, as if I were visiting a doctor or a dentist. Have you ever needed to make an appointment to see someone you created? The visits became increasingly spaced out. First, every week, then every 2 weeks, then once a month. When I went, the conversation mostly revolved around their jobs, their plans, their friends. I listened with interest, but they rarely asked about my life. It was as if I only existed for them, as if my only identity was being Beatrice's mother. During the holiday season last year, I noticed that Beatrice and Rodrigo started spending more time with the Tavares family. "It's just that Rodrigo's parents have very beautiful traditions," Beatrice explained when I asked if they would come to Christmas dinner like we always did. "But next year, we'll do it at our house, okay?" Next year never came, or rather, it arrived without me. It was in February when Beatrice told me that she and Rodrigo were thinking about getting married. "How wonderful, daughter," I exclaimed, feeling a mixture of joy and anticipation. I immediately began making mental plans. The church, the dress, the flowers, the food. "Have you set a date yet? How can I help?" "Mom, we want something simple," Beatrice said, but there was something evasive in her gaze. "Nothing too elaborate. Marriage isn't as complicated as it used to be. I nodded, though I felt a little disappointed inside. I had dreamed for years of helping plan my only daughter's wedding. Have you ever dreamed of a moment for years, only to have it slip through your fingers? The months passed, and conversations about marriage became vague and sporadic. When I asked about specific details, Beatrice always had the same answer. "We're still looking into it, Mom. I'll let you know as soon as we decide on something." I started to feel like something wasn't right, but I didn't know what exactly. In May, I noticed that Beatrice started posting more photos on Facebook. Photos with Rodrigo, with the Tavares, in expensive restaurants, in places I didn't recognize. But when we saw each other in person, she told me very little about these events. It was as if she had two parallel lives, one she shared with me and one she lived in secret. It was early June when I began to suspect that something was definitely going on. Beatrice canceled 3 dates with me in a row, always with excuses about work or urgent commitments. When we finally met, she seemed distracted, nervous. I asked directly if everything was okay with Rodrigo, if there was any problem. "Everything is perfect, Mom," she said, without looking me in the eyes. "It's just that we're very busy with work and other things." Other things? Those words echoed in my mind for days. What other things could be more important than including her own mother in her life? The last time I spoke to Beatrice before I discovered the truth was on a Sunday afternoon. I called to invite her to lunch the following Tuesday. "I can't, Mom," she said. "I have a very important meeting this morning." That was strange. Tuesday mornings had always been our special time since she was little. It was the only day of the week I didn't work at the Rodriguez house. "How about Wednesday then?" I insisted. "I don't know, Mom. Let me check my schedule and I'll call you back." But she never called back. And I, as I always did, waited patiently for the call that never came. It was that Tuesday morning, just when I should have been having lunch with my daughter, that I sat in my kitchen with my coffee and a piece of cornmeal cake. I went on Facebook to see photos of my friend Aparecida's grandchildren, and I came across the image that would change my life forever. The day I ceased to exist. There was Beatrice, more beautiful than ever, in a simple but elegant wedding dress, smiling next to Rodrigo in what was clearly a wedding ceremony. In the background, the happy faces of Mr. Marcos and Mrs. Teresa Tavares, dressed elegantly, posing as the only witnesses to that moment that should have been mine too. The photo description said, "Finally married. Thank you to our families for making this day perfect." Our families, in the plural. But I didn't appear anywhere. It wasn't in the photo. It wasn't in the comments. It wasn't in that story that was supposed to encompass my entire life. Have you ever been erased from a story you wrote? I read every comment on that post. College friends congratulating, co-workers sending their blessings, some distant relatives expressing surprise that they hadn't heard about the wedding. But no comment mentioned my absence. It was as if I had never existed in Beatrice's life, as if those 28 years of sacrifice and love had been completely erased from her personal history. I spent the rest of that day in a state of shock. I looked at my phone repeatedly, waiting for a call, a message, an explanation. Nothing. Beatrice had continued with her normal life, posting photos of her honeymoon in Gramado, thanking people for their congratulations, sharing moments of happiness from which I had been completely excluded. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my small room, I realized something that hurt more than I ever imagined possible. My daughter hadn't forgotten to include me in her wedding. She had consciously excluded me. She had made a deliberate choice that I would not be a part of the most important day of her life. And in that moment of painful clarity, I knew that my life, as I had known it, was over forever. But what Beatrice didn't know was that her mother, Rosa Helena, had harbored much more than just pain during all those years of sacrifice. She had also stored up a strength that she herself didn't know she possessed. A dignity that had lain dormant, but never dead. And a decision-making ability that was about to change everything forever. Have you found strength within yourself that you didn't even know existed? The woman who got out of that bed Wednesday morning was no longer the same woman who had waited patiently to be included in her daughter's life. She was a woman who had finally understood that some absences speak louder than any presence, and that sometimes the greatest love a mother can show is respect for her own dignity. On that silent dawn in Belo Horizonte, as the bells of the Church of San Jose rang 3 a.m., Rosa Helena Santos made the first completely self-directed decision she had made in almost 30 years. If she was no longer welcome in Beatrice's life, then Beatrice would no longer be welcome in hers. But this story was just beginning, and what came next would change the lives of everyone involved in ways none of them could have imagined. Rosa Helena's plan. The following days passed in a dense fog that prevented me from seeing clearly where my life was going. Beatrice didn't call to explain. She didn't show up at home. She showed no sign of remorse. She continued posting photos of her honeymoon in Gramado, in the Serra Gaúcha region, as if nothing had happened, as if I were just another follower on her social media. Each new photo was a confirmation that I was truly no longer a part of her life. I tried to keep myself busy with household chores, with Wednesday Mass at the Church of San Jose, with conversations with Dona Marlene Rodriguez, my lifelong neighbor. But no matter how hard I tried to hide it, the pain was always there. A deep ache in my chest, like a constant presence that made it difficult to even breathe. Do you believe that even in the greatest pain, hope can be born? It was while I was organizing old papers in the wooden trunk that had belonged to my mother that the souvenirs came flooding back. I found birth certificates, vaccination records that I had kept so carefully, school reports showing that Beatrice always got excellent grades. I remembered every sacrifice, the early mornings sewing dresses for the ladies in the neighborhood to pay for Beatrice's English lessons. The times I ate only bread and butter so she could have meat on her plate. The birthday presents I saved up all year to buy. I remembered the times she would come home crying because her friends had designer clothes. And the next day, I would go to the Afonso Pena Fair or the Central Market to buy exactly what she wanted, even if it meant being late on paying the rent that month. Have you ever deprived yourself of everything to give everything to someone? During all those years, Beatrice always had an excuse for not including me fully in her life. First came her studies, then her work, then her boyfriend, Rodrigo, who didn't get along with mothers-in-law. I always accepted. I always understood. I always adapted to her schedule, her whims, her decisions. But now, looking back, I realize I'd become increasingly smaller in her life, taking up ever smaller spaces until I reached the point where I didn't even know she was getting married. The Beatrice I created, the one I loved unconditionally, the one I always put first, had become a stranger who only shared crumbs of attention with me when it suited her. That Thursday afternoon, while sorting family photos in a shoebox, I found one that made me cry harder than I had in years. It was Beatrice's first communion. She was 8 years old. She was wearing a beautiful white dress that I had specially made for a local seamstress. In the photo, Beatrice was hugging me tightly, smiling with pure and genuine happiness. I was smiling too. But now I could see in my eyes from back then something I had lost, the certainty that I was loved unconditionally by my daughter. Have you ever looked at an old photo and seen a person you are no longer? I remembered that day perfectly. I had saved for 6 months for that celebration. I rented the parish hall. I invited the whole family. I prepared savory and sweet treats, brigadeiros, beijinhos, cajuzinhos, and a 3-tiered cake I had specially ordered. Beatrice felt like a princess that day. She ran from table to table, introducing me to everyone as my mother, the most beautiful in the world. That night, when everyone had left, she helped me clear the dishes and said, "Mom, when I grow up and have my own parties, you'll always be the most important person. Always." Tears streamed down my face as I held that photograph. What happened to that little girl who promised me that I would always be the most important person? When did I become so insignificant that I didn't even deserve to be present at her wedding? I continued looking at the photos and found another one that hurt just as much. Beatrice at 15 years old, on the day of her debutante party. We had rented the hall at Club Atlético Minero, there in Pampulha. There was a DJ, food for 150 people, and a live band for the waltz. I had worked double shifts for a whole year to throw her that party. I cleaned houses by day, babysat by night, sold cakes and dulce de leche at the market on weekends, all to see her happy, to give her the celebration she deserved. In that photo, Beatrice and I were dancing together, mother and daughter, during one of the songs. She had asked to play a special song that she called Our Song. "Mom, you used to sing this to me when I was little and sick, and it always made me feel better." And she had told me, "I want us to dance together so everyone knows how much I love you." Those words echoed in my mind like sounds from another life. How I had gone from being the person who comforted her when she was sick to being someone she was ashamed of. How had I gone from being the person who comforted her when she was sick to someone she was ashamed of in front of her new family? I kept looking and found a letter Beatrice had written to me when she was 18, right before she started college. She had written on pink paper in neat handwriting with hearts drawn in the margins. It said, "Dear Mother, tomorrow I begin a new stage in my life, but I want you to know that nothing I achieve will be possible without everything you've done for me. You are my hero, my role model, the bravest woman I know. When I grow up, I want to be a mother like you, loving, self-sacrificing, and always putting family first. I love you with all my heart, and you will always be the most important person in my life. Your daughter who loves you, Beatrice." I read that letter 3 times before I could believe what I was reading. Was this the same person who had just excluded me from the most important day of her life? The same one who had promised that I would always be the most important person? I sat on the bed with the letter trembling in my hands and cried like I hadn't cried since the day I buried Antonio. I cried for the girl who wrote those words and for the woman she became. I cried for all the dreams I had of being the mother of the bride. I cried for all the times I imagined helping her choose her dress, organizing her bridal shower, walking her down the aisle. I cried for the mother-daughter relationship I thought we had, which apparently only existed in my imagination. And you? How would you react to a revelation like that? After the tears came anger, a rage I had never felt in my 65 years of life. How dare she treat me like this after everything I had done for her? How could she be so cruel, so ungrateful? I had sacrificed my youth, my social life, my own dreams, everything for her. I had worked until my bones ached so that she could have opportunities that I never had. And this is how she repaid me? With humiliation, exclusion, and oblivion? But after the anger came something worse. Shame. I began to wonder if it was somehow my fault. Had I been too intense? Too clingy? Too unsophisticated for Beatrice's refined new life? I remembered the faces of Mr. Marcos and Mrs. Teresa Tavares when they met me. That subtle expression that I hadn't been able to interpret at the time. But now I understood clearly. Pity mixed with discomfort. To them, I was the embarrassing mother-in-law who had to be tolerated, not accepted. I got out of bed and looked at myself in the mirror on the dressing table. There was Rosa Helena Santos, 65 years old, gray hair tied in a simple bun, hands rough from so much work, wrinkles around her eyes that spoke of years of worry. I wasn't as elegant as Dona Teresa Tavares. I hadn't traveled the world. I didn't speak other languages. I didn't understand fine wines or theater. She was a simple woman who had done the best she could with what she had. But did that make me any less valuable? Did that justify my own daughter treating me as if I didn't exist? Have you ever felt ashamed of who you are, even though you know you shouldn't? I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake thinking about all the signs I'd ignored, all the moments I should have known I was losing my daughter. Family dinners became more infrequent. Phone calls became shorter. Visits required prior scheduling. Everything had been gradual, so subtle that I hadn't realized I was being systematically excluded from Beatrice's life. On Friday morning, I decided to call my sister, Aunt Rosa Maria, who lives in Juiz de Fora. I needed to talk to someone, vent, ask for advice. Aunt Rosa Maria has always been the most direct of my sisters, the one who says things bluntly. "Did she get married without telling you?" Aunt Rosa Maria screamed when I told her what had happened. "This girl is crazy! How can a daughter do this to her own mother?" I told the whole story, from the first changes in Beatrice's attitude to the discovery of the marriage on Facebook. Aunt Rosa Maria listened without interrupting, which was rare for her. Finally, she said in a serious voice, "Rosa Helena, I always told you that you gave too much to that girl. You spoiled her since she was little. You put her on a pedestal, and now you see the consequences. A child needs limits. He needs to understand that respect is earned and maintained." Her words hurt because I knew they held truth. I had always given in to Beatrice. I had always given in to her tantrums. I had always put her needs before my own. But I had done it out of love, because I wanted her to have everything I couldn't have. "So what should I do now?" I asked, sobbing. "Now you will do what you should have done years ago," Aunt Rosa Maria replied firmly. "You will live for yourself. Beatrice has already made her decision about what place you occupy in her life. Now it's your turn to decide what place she occupies in yours." After hanging up with Aunt Rosa Maria, I sat in the kitchen for hours thinking about her words. She was right. Beatrice had clearly demonstrated what place I occupied in her new life. None. It was time for me to also make a decision about what place she would occupy in my new life. The new Rosa Helena. On Saturday morning, while I was drinking my coffee with milk and eating my cheese bread, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard Beatrice's voice. "Mom, how are you?" she asked in a cheerful voice, as if nothing had happened. "Guess what? We're back from our honeymoon. Gramado was wonderful. Rodrigo and I want to come over this afternoon to tell you all about it." To tell me everything? After 2 weeks of silence, after excluding me from her wedding, now she wanted to tell me everything as if I were a casual friend she was catching up on about her vacation? "What time are you planning on coming?" I asked. "Around 5 p.m. We'll bring you photos and some little gifts we bought for you." Could little gifts from Gramado make up for the biggest humiliation of my life? "All good," I said. "I'll be here." After hanging up, I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling a mix of emotions that I didn't know how to manage. Part of me was happy to finally see my daughter, to be able to hug her and tell her how much I had missed her. But another part of me, a part that grew with each passing hour, was furious at how coldly she had treated me, at how casually she had assumed everything would be okay after what she had done. Have you ever wanted to hug and confront someone at the same time? I spent the rest of the day cleaning the house, making iced tea, and buying fresh cornmeal cake from Mr. Walkham's bakery. That's what I always did when Beatrice came to visit. I made sure everything was perfect for her. But this time, as I mopped the floor and dusted the furniture, I wondered why I was still putting in so much effort for someone who clearly didn't appreciate my efforts. At 5 o'clock sharp, Beatrice and Rodrigo arrived. Beatrice was radiant, tanned from the mountain sun, wearing new clothes, looking completely happy. Rodrigo wore a polite but distant smile, the same one he always had when he came to my house. "Mother!" Beatrice screamed, hugging me as if we were the best friends in the world. "I missed you. Look how tan I got." I hugged her back, inhaling her expensive perfume, which wasn't the same one she wore when she lived with me. Everything about her was different. Her clothes, her hairstyle, her way of speaking. It was as if the Beatrice I knew had been replaced by a new and improved version that didn't include me. "Sit down," I said. I served iced tea and offered the fresh cornmeal cake. "Oh, Mom, how delicious," Beatrice said, but I noticed she barely touched the cake. she probably didn't eat that kind of thing anymore. Her sophisticated life no longer included sweets from the neighborhood bakery. "So, tell me everything," I said, sitting across from them in my small room. "How was the wedding?" Beatrice exchanged a quick glance with Rodrigo before answering. "It was very beautiful, Mom. Very simple, just the way we wanted. Nothing too elaborate." "Oh, and where was it?" I asked, though my heart was already sinking. "In a beautiful little chapel in Oro Preto. Very intimate, very private. Just us and Rodrigo's parents as witnesses. Just them and Rodrigo's parents. As if I didn't exist. As if 28 years of raising her didn't give me the right to be there." "And why didn't you tell me anything?" I finally asked, my voice shaking. Beatrice sighed and made that face she made when she was a child and was caught doing something wrong. "Mom, it all happened so quickly. You know how bureaucratic things are. Suddenly the date came up and we decided not to complicate things. Besides, I've never really liked big parties." It was a lie. Beatrice had always loved big parties. Her 15th birthday, her graduation, all the celebrations we'd shared had been filled with guests, lots of food, and lots of joy. But now, for her wedding, she had decided she wanted something intimate that didn't include me. Have you ever heard a lie so obvious it hurt more than the truth? "But Mom," Beatrice continued in a honeyed voice, "that's why we came today. To celebrate with you. Look at all the little gifts we brought." She pulled out a bag full of typical Gramado souvenirs. A miniature half-timbered house, some chocolates, a t-shirt that said, "I love Gramado," and some plastic souvenirs. Gifts they had probably bought at the airport thinking, "Oh, we need to take something to Beatrice's mother." "Thank you, daughter," I said, feeling like each gift was a slap in the face disguised as kindness. We spent 2 hours talking about their honeymoon, the places they visited, the fancy restaurants they ate at, the activities they did. It was like looking at strangers' vacation photos. I nodded, smiled, asked the appropriate questions. But inside, I felt like something was breaking completely. When they left, after vague promises to see each other soon and an invitation to see their new apartment, I was left alone in my living room, surrounded by cheap souvenirs, feeling the weight of the silence they left behind. That night, as I put the gifts away in a drawer where I knew I would never see them again, I made a decision that would change everything. If Beatrice could live without including me in the important moments of her life, then I could also learn to live without including her in the important moments of mine. And in that early morning silence, with my heart still aching, but with a new determination growing within me, I began to plan the first step of my new life. A life where I was the protagonist, not just the sacrificial mother hoping for crumbs of attention. Rosa Helena, who had waited her entire life for others to decide her place in the world, died that night. The woman who woke up the next day would be a completely different woman. A woman who finally understood that respect is taught by example, and that sometimes the greatest love a mother can show is the love for her own dignity. Organizing my freedom. Sunday dawned with a clear sky that completely contrasted with the storm I carried inside. I got up earlier than usual at 5 a.m., and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel that heavy feeling in my chest that had been with me since I found out about the wedding. In its place was something different, a cold clarity I had never experienced before. It was as if overnight I had undergone a silent transformation. As if Rosa Helena, who had waited her entire life for others to define her place in the world, had finally awakened from a very long sleep. I made my coffee black, stronger than usual. I needed my mind to be completely clear for what I was about to do. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd had breakfast for the past 15 years, where I'd waited for so many calls from Beatrice that never came, where I'd planned special meals for guests that were canceled at the last minute. But this morning, that table no longer represented waiting or disappointment. It represented the place where Rosa Helena Santos was going to make the most important decision of her life. Have you ever woken up one day knowing that nothing would ever be the same again? I grabbed an old notebook where I used to write down Beatrice's doctor's appointments when she was little, important school dates, and friends' birthdays. Now, I was going to use those yellowed pages to plan something completely different, my definitive exit from a life where I was no longer welcome. On the first page, I wrote, Independence Plan, Rosa Helena Santos, August 12, 2024. The date felt strange written in my shaky handwriting, but the words felt more real than anything I'd felt in years. The first thing I wrote was, evaluate resources. During all those years of sacrifice, I had managed to save a considerable amount. She wasn't rich, but she wasn't destitute either. He had his life savings, a small but well-paid house in a neighborhood that had become very gentrified, and something Beatrice never knew, a secret bank account where I'd deposited the extra money I'd earned sewing dresses for the neighborhood ladies on weekends for years. I had opened that account when Beatrice turned 18, thinking it would be my wedding present to her. My daughter, this is for you to start your marriage debt-free, to have your own home, to avoid going through the difficulties I went through. For 10 years, I fed that account with the illusion of seeing Beatrice's happy look when she discovered the surprise. But now, after being excluded from her wedding, that money would take a completely different path. Do you have something you've kept for years for someone who didn't value you? The second point on my list was research housing options. I couldn't stay in this house where every corner reminded me of the years of waiting, where every phone call made me think it might be Beatrice seeking reconciliation. I needed a new place, a space that was completely mine, where I could build a life that didn't depend on crumbs of attention from my daughter. I remembered that Dona Marlene Rodriguez, my lifelong neighbor, always told me about her sister, Dona Gloria, who had moved to a senior's home in Contagium, in the metropolitan region of Belo Horizonte. It's wonderful, Rosa, Dona Marlene had told me several times. There are activities, security, people our age. Gloria says she has never felt so free in her life. At the time, I thought those places were for people who didn't have family to take care of them. Now he understood that they were for people who decided to take care of themselves. The third point was the most painful, but the most necessary. Gradually cut ties. She couldn't just disappear overnight. That would cause unnecessary drama and give Beatrice reasons to justify her behavior. My mom was always so dramatic. That's why we didn't include her in important things. No. My exit had to be as silent and dignified as my entry into Rodrigo Tavares's life had been. Gradual, respectful, but definitive. After breakfast, I showered and put on my navy blue Sunday dress, the one I wore to Mass at St. Joseph's Church. But this morning, I wasn't going to church. I was about to begin the most important investigation of my life. I grabbed my bag, put my notebook inside, and left the house with a determination I hadn't felt in years. It was strange walking the streets of my neighborhood, Padre Eustachio, knowing that each step took me away from the life I had known for 65 years. Have you ever felt fear and freedom at the same time? My first stop was the bank. It was strange going to Banco do Brasil on a Sunday morning, but I knew there was a 24-hour ATM where I could at least check my balances. Mr. Fernando Lawson, the manager who had handled my accounts for 10 years, would have been surprised to see me fiddling with my finances on a Sunday morning. "Good morning, Mrs. Rosa," he greeted me when he recognized me near the cashier. "Everything is fine?" "Everything is perfect, Mr. Fernando," I replied with a smile that I myself didn't expect to have. "I'm just reviewing my financial options. I may need to make some moves this week." "Of course, ma'am. I'm available on Monday if you'd like to review your accounts in detail." "Thank you very much. See you on Monday then." That little conversation gave me more energy than I expected. For the first time in years, someone spoke to me like a person capable of making important financial decisions, not like an old lady who needed others to manage her money. From there, I went straight to Contagium, to the residence that Dona Marlene had mentioned. I took the bus on Avenida Amazonas, and throughout the journey, I looked out the window, watching Belo Horizonte pass by. Mineirão, Pampulha, the historic center. It was as if I was silently saying goodbye to an entire life. The residence was called Abode of the Sun, and as soon as I got off the bus, I could see why Dona Marlene's sister liked it so much. It was a beautiful, clean place, with well-kept gardens and an atmosphere of tranquility that I hadn't felt in years. The receptionist, a very kind young lady named Patricia, greeted me with a genuine smile when I explained that I was interested in seeing the facilities. "I'm glad you came," she said enthusiastically. "We happen to have 2 very nice apartments available. Would you like a full tour?" For the next 2 hours, Patricia showed me every corner of the Sun House. The apartments were small but comfortable, perfect for one person. They had an integrated living room kitchen, a bedroom, a full bathroom, and a fully equipped kitchenette. What I liked most was the balcony overlooking the gardens, where I could imagine myself having my morning coffee and watching the sunset in the afternoon. "We have many activities," Patricia explained as we walked through the common areas. "On Mondays, we have yoga classes. On Tuesdays, crafts and crochet. On Wednesdays, Mass in the internal chapel. On Thursdays, ballroom dancing. And on Fridays, movies with popcorn. On weekends, we organize excursions to different places, Ouro Preto, Tiradentes, Inotim, and waterfalls in the region." Every activity she mentioned sounded like something I might enjoy. Things I'd never done because I was always waiting for Beatriz to be available. "And are the people who live here happy?" I asked. "Look, Mrs. Rosa," Patricia told me honestly, "most of our residents come here after difficult family situations. Some have lost their partners. Others have children who live far away. Others simply decided they wanted to live more independently. At first, many arrive sad, nostalgic. But after a few months, you see them and they seem like different people. Happier, more active, more, how should I say, more alive." Those words resonated deeply within me. More alive. How long had it been since I felt truly alive? How many years had I spent simply existing, waiting for my daughter to include me in her life? "What are the requirements for living here?" I asked. Patricia explained the whole process. I needed to be over 60, have a stable income to cover the monthly tuition, I had several years' worth of savings, and pass a basic medical evaluation to ensure I could live independently. My health was excellent. The monthly cost included maintenance, security, activities, and basic utilities. It was a considerable amount, but perfectly manageable with my savings. "How long does the admission process take?" I asked. "If you bring all the documents this week, we can have everything ready in 2 weeks," Patricia replied. "Are you interested in any of the apartments you saw?" I looked once more at the balcony of the apartment I had liked the most, the one overlooking the gardens, where I had seen several residents chatting animatedly under the shade of a large tree. At that moment, I made a decision that surprised me with its speed and clarity. "I'll take the one with the balcony overlooking the gardens," he said without hesitation. "Excellent choice," exclaimed Patricia. "This is one of the most requested. Here is the list of documents you need to bring and the contract for you to review calmly." I returned home that afternoon with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope. Not the hope that Beatrice would change, not the hope that things would go back to the way they were, but the hope of a new life that depended exclusively on my own decisions. What would you do if you discovered a secret hidden in your own home? The secret that you were always stronger than you thought. That night, instead of watching television like I did every Sunday, I dedicated myself to organizing my documents: birth certificate, proof of income, bank statements, identity document. It felt strange to be preparing paperwork to start a new life at 65. But each document I organized made me feel more certain of my decision. On Monday morning, I went to the bank at exactly 9 a.m. when it opened. Mr. Fernando Lawson welcomed me with the same professional courtesy as always. But when I explained that I needed to make some important transactions in my accounts for a personal investment, I noticed a respect in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "Mrs. Rosa, I'm glad to hear that you're making proactive financial decisions," he said as he reviewed my statements. "I see that you have been very disciplined with your savings all these years. You have very solid resources." Hearing those words filled me with a confidence I didn't know I had. For so many years, I had lived with the mindset that I was a person of limited resources, someone who depended on the charity of others. But the reality was that I had worked hard, saved with discipline, and built a solid financial foundation without anyone's help. Over the next few days, my life became a succession of practical tasks that kept me busy and focused. I hired a moving company to evaluate my belongings. I decided to keep only the essentials: clothes, some small furniture, important photos, and objects with genuine sentimental value. Everything else would be donated or sold. The hardest part was deciding what to do with Beatrice's things that I still kept in her room: school trophies, books, clothes she left behind when she moved out. I finally decided to carefully pack everything into labeled boxes and leave it in a rented storage unit near her apartment. If she wanted to one day, she could get them. If not, eventually. During that week, Beatrice called me twice. The conversations were polite but distant on both sides. She told him about her new job, her plans to decorate the apartment, and the dinners she had with the Tavares family. I listened politely, asked appropriate questions, but shared nothing about my own plans. For the first time in years, I had important secrets that didn't include my daughter. "Is everything okay, Mom?" she asked on the second call. "You look different." "Everything is perfect, daughter," I replied with complete honesty. "I'm just organizing some things around the house. You know how it is." "Do you need help with anything?" The question would have moved me before. Now it only confirmed that Beatrice still saw me as someone who needed help, not as someone capable of solving her own problems. "No, thank you, daughter. Everything is under control." On Friday of that week, I received a call from Patricia from Morada do Sol. My application had been approved, and I could move in the following Monday if I wanted. That night, alone in my house, surrounded by packed boxes and furniture covered with sheets, I felt no sadness or nostalgia. I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: the excitement of starting something new. On Saturday morning, as I was drinking my last cup of coffee at the kitchen table where I had planned so many special meals for Beatrice, my phone rang. It was her. "Mom, Rodrigo and I want to invite you to dinner tomorrow, Sunday. We're going to debut the dining room in the apartment." It was the invitation I had been waiting for months. They finally wanted to include me in something. Show me their new home, treat me as part of their lives. But it was too late. "Oh, daughter, what a shame," I replied in a calm voice. "I already have an appointment for tomorrow." "Commitment to whom?" "With some new friends. Let's take a trip to Inhotim." It wasn't a lie. The residents of Morada do Sol had a tour scheduled for Sunday, and I had already signed up. "But Mom, we can move it to another day. It's important for us that you see our house." "Thank you, daughter. But I'm already engaged. Maybe another time when I have more time." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Beatrice wasn't used to me having plans that didn't involve waiting for her. "Okay then, we'll arrange it for another time when you're available." "Of course, daughter. Have a wonderful dinner." When I hung up, I sat in that familiar kitchen for the last time, smiling with deep satisfaction. For the first time in her life, Beatrice had to adjust to my schedule instead of me adjusting to hers. It was a small change, but it symbolized a much larger transformation. Rosa Helena Santos had stopped being a woman waiting to be included and had become a woman who had her own life, her own plans, her own happiness. Have you ever felt like you were becoming who you were always meant to be? Starting over at 65. On Sunday night, after returning from a beautiful day of sightseeing at Inhotim, where I met 3 lovely women who would become my new neighbors, I packed up the last of my personal belongings. The move would be very early on Monday, and by noon I would already be settled into my new home. On that last night in the house where I raised Beatrice, I didn't cry or feel nostalgic. Instead, I felt a deep gratitude for the woman I had been and a genuine excitement for the woman I was becoming. I had made the bravest decision of my life, choosing my own happiness instead of waiting for the approval of others. Early Monday morning, as the truck drivers loaded up my few belongings, I took one last look at each room in the house. In Beatrice's room, now completely empty, I whispered a silent goodbye. Thank you for teaching me that true love sometimes means knowing when to walk away. The Rosa Helena who left that house that Monday morning was a completely new woman. A woman who had learned that dignity is non-negotiable, that respect is taught by example, and that it's never too late to start over when you make the right decision. As the moving truck headed towards Contagium, towards my new life at Morada do Sol, I sat in the passenger seat smiling at the future. For the first time in 65 years, I didn't know exactly what to expect, and that uncertainty seemed like the most beautiful freedom in the world. When she found out. My first week at Morada do Sol passed like a beautiful dream from which I didn't want to wake up. Every morning, I woke up in my cozy apartment, made my coffee in my kitchen, which was entirely mine, and went to the balcony to look at the gardens where I had already identified my new neighbors. There was Dona Mercedes, 72 years old, who had been a primary school teacher for 40 years. Dona Leonor, 69, who worked in a government office and had fascinating stories from her youth. And Mr. Alexandra, 75 years old, a widower like me, who had been a carpenter and now made small pieces of furniture as gifts for his new friends. It was strange to feel part of a group where I was valued for who I was, not for what I could do for others. At community meals, my new friends asked me about my life, my opinions, my plans. No one saw me as someone's mother or an embarrassing mother-in-law. I was simply Rosa Helena, a woman with her own stories, her own dreams, her own personality. Have you ever felt truly seen for the first time? On Wednesday of my first week, I attended a crochet class led by Dona Eleonora Rodriguez, an elegant 74-year-old woman who had been a seamstress in her youth. As we embroidered flowers on a napkin, I realized I hadn't done anything purely for pleasure in years. Everything was always about whether Beatrice would like it, whether it would be useful for the house. You know, Rosa, Dona Eleonora said as she checked my work, you have a good hand for this. You should come to every class. It was a simple compliment, but it touched my heart. How long had it been since I received recognition for something I had done well? In my previous life, my achievements were always measured by how much they helped Beatrice. Now, for the first time, someone valued my work for what it was. On Thursday was my first ballroom dancing lesson. Alexander Davis, a very distinguished 76-year-old man who had been a physical education teacher, led the classes with contagious patience and joy. At first, I was embarrassed because I hadn't danced in decades. But Mr. Alexander reassured me, no one judges here, Rosa. We come to have fun and remember that it's never too late to learn new things. During that class, I danced samba, waltz, and even a little foro. I laughed harder than I had in years. My classmates cheered me on when I mastered a difficult step, helped me when I messed up, and made me feel like part of a real family. A family that had chosen me and that I had chosen too. That night, while I was having dinner alone in my apartment but not feeling lonely, my phone rang. It was Beatrice. "Mom, where are you?" she asked, her voice frantic. "I went to the house and it's completely empty. The neighbors said you moved out." "What's going on?" Her voice held a mixture of confusion and panic I hadn't heard since she was little and got lost in the grocery store. For a moment, my maternal instinct wanted to immediately reassure her, explain everything, assure her that I was okay. But the new Rosa Helena, who had emerged in recent weeks, maintained her composure. "I'm very well, daughter," I replied in a calm voice. "I moved to a place more suitable for my age." More suitable? What does that mean? Why didn't you tell me anything? Because they were personal decisions that did not require your approval, he said firmly, but without aggression. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Beatrice wasn't used to me making important decisions without consulting her, even though she had been making hers without consulting me for years. Where are you living now? In a place where I'm happy, daughter. That's what matters. Mom, you're scaring me. This isn't like you. Are you mad at me for something? The question would have disarmed me before. I would have rushed to explain that I wasn't mad, that I loved her, that I just wanted us to be happy together. But now I saw that question for what it really was, an attempt to return to the old dynamic where I was responsible for managing her emotions. I'm not mad, Beatrice. I'm living my life. What does this mean? It means that I finally understand that I have the right to make my own decisions, to have my own plans, to be happy without depending on the approval of others. Another silence. I could imagine Beatrice on the other side trying to process this version of her mother that she didn't know. Can you tell me where you are? Rodrigo and I are worried. Me and Rodrigo. Always me and Rodrigo, as if we were a single entity making joint decisions about my life. But there was something in Beatrice's tone that was different. For the first time in a long time, she seemed genuinely concerned about me, not just angry that I wasn't available when she needed me. I'm at the abode of the sun in Contagium, finally said. It's a very good residence for people my age. I have my own apartment, my own activities, my own social life. A nursing home? The word bothered me, but it didn't surprise me. For Beatrice, any place where older people lived was automatically a nursing home. No, daughter. It's a place where I live independently, but with the company of people who are in the same stage of life as me. I have my own apartment, my own activities, my own social life. Social life? There was genuine surprise in her voice, as if she had never considered that I could have a social life independent of her. Yes, Beatrice. I have new friends, activities I enjoy, plans that don't involve waiting for you to have time for me. The words came out more bluntly than I had planned, but I didn't regret saying them. It was time for Beatrice to understand the consequences of her decisions. Mom, we always had time for you. Did you really, Beatrice? Did you have time to include me in your wedding? The silence that followed was long and heavy. It was the first time I had directly mentioned the exclusion from marriage, and we both knew it was the elephant in the room that had been present in all our subsequent conversations. Mom, I already explained that it was all very quick, that it was a simple thing. Beatrix, I interrupted in a firm but calm voice. I'm not interested in hearing any more excuses. What happened, happened. I'm not looking for excuses or explanations. I just want you to understand that decisions have consequences. What kind of consequences? The consequence of finally understanding that I'm not a priority in your life, and I've decided that you're not going to be a priority in mine either. The words came out with a clarity that surprised me. There was no anger in my voice, no resentment, just a quiet honesty that made me feel freer than I had in years. Does this mean you don't want to be my mother anymore? The question hurt because I could hear the little girl behind the grown woman, but it also strengthened me because it reminded me that Beatrice knew exactly what she had lost. I will always be your mother, daughter, but I will no longer be the mother who expects crumbs of your attention. I will no longer be the mother who accepts any treatment just to be present in your life. If you want a relationship with me, it will have to be a relationship of mutual respect. And what would that be like? It was the first time Beatrice had specifically asked me what I wanted from our relationship instead of simply assuming I would adapt to whatever she offered. I still don't know, I answered honestly. But I know it can't be like it was before. After hanging up that night, I sat on my porch looking out at the lights of Contagium, feeling a mixture of sadness and liberation. It had been the most difficult conversation of my life, but also the most necessary. For the first time, I had set clear boundaries with my daughter. I had expressed my feelings without trying to protect hers. I had placed my dignity above my desire to keep the peace. When words freeze the heart. The months passed slowly, as if time, too, was afraid to move on without her. Winter was gone, and the city was blooming again. But to me, nothing felt the same. Beatrice didn't call to explain. She didn't show up at Morada do Sol. She showed no real sign of remorse. She continued her normal life, posting photos on social media, her and Rodrigo in fancy restaurants, weekend trips, dinners with the Tavares family. Each new post was a confirmation that I really wasn't part of that life. Have you ever been forgotten by someone who continued living as if you never existed? I tried to keep myself busy with crochet classes, Thursday dances, weekend excursions. I visited Tiradentes, Ouro Preto, and the waterfalls of Conceição do Mato Dentro. I made true friendships with women who also had their own stories of family exclusion, distant children, and lost loves. Dona Mercedes told me about her son who lived in São Paulo and only called on Mother's Day. Dona Leonor shared the pain of having raised 3 children alone and now being practically forgotten by all of them. Alexandra spoke about the wife he lost and how the children had fought over the inheritance even before she was buried. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, that there were other Rosa Helenas in the world, other mothers who gave everything and received crumbs. But this solidarity didn't erase the pain. It just made it more bearable. It was one October morning, 7 months after my move, that I received a letter. It wasn't a WhatsApp message. It wasn't an email. It was a physical letter, delivered by the post office, with my name and new address written in a handwriting I didn't immediately recognize. When I opened it, I saw that it was typed. No tears to smudge the ink. No hand trembling from emotion. It was Beatrice's. Have you ever received something that was supposed to be cute, but arrived cold? I sat on the porch, the letter in my hands trembling slightly, and began to read. Mother, I am writing this letter because I think you deserve an explanation about what happened in my marriage. It was a practical decision. Rodrigo's parents insisted on a small, intimate ceremony. They didn't want a large party with lots of guests. Rodrigo and I decided to respect their wishes because, after all, they were paying for everything. It wasn't anything personal against you. It was just a matter of logistics and not wanting to create conflict with my new in-laws. I knew you'd understand because you've always been so understanding. I hope that now that some time has passed, you can get over this and we can get back to having a normal relationship. Beatrice. I read that letter 3 times before I could fully process what I was reading. Beatrice had reduced the most painful moment of my life to a practical decision. She had turned my exclusion into a logistical issue. There was no recognition of the harm he had caused me. There was no understanding of the sacrifice it was for me to raise her alone. There was no gratitude for the years of unconditional love I gave her. There was only a cold, calculated explanation that treated our relationship as a social obligation that could be managed efficiently, not as a sacred bond that deserved care and respect. Have you ever received an apology that hurt more than the offense itself? That letter confirmed something I already knew in my heart. The Beatrice I raised, the girl who promised that I would always be the most important person in her life, was gone forever. In her place was a woman who saw our relationship as a social obligation that needed to be managed, not as a sacred bond that deserved to be nurtured. I kept the letter in a wooden box along with some old photos that had withstood the test of time. Not out of spite, but because some words just need to be read, not responded to. A mother's love never ends. It just changes form. My love for Beatrice transformed into something different. Respect for my own dignity, care for my own happiness, protection for my own peace. Epilogue. Peace found. 90 to 98 minutes. What remains when everything passes? Today, 6 months later, I wake up every morning in my small but cozy apartment. I look out the window and see a different world. It's not a world without pain, but it's a world where I choose who is part of my story. I tend to my plants on the balcony. I read the books I've always wanted to read. I frequent the new chapel where no one knows me as Beatrice's mother. I am simply Rosa Helena Santos, a 65-year-old woman who is learning to live for herself after decades of living exclusively for others. Have you discovered who you are beyond the roles others have given you? Sometimes I get calls from unknown numbers that I know are Beatrice trying to reach me through other people's phones. I hear her voice on the answering machine, always crying, always apologizing, always promising she'll change. But some exclusions cause pain too deep to be healed with words alone. Some rejections are too final to be forgiven with simple remorse. Beatrice had the opportunity to include me in the most important moment of her life, and she chose to leave me out. Now I choose to leave her out of my new life. During these months, I learned that the loneliness I feared does not exist when you live at peace with yourself. My days are filled with activities that nourish my soul. Crochet lessons with Donna Eleonora. Thursday dances with Seu Alexandre. Weekend excursions where I discovered parts of Minas Gerais I'd never visited before. At community dinners, my friends listen attentively when I tell stories from my youth, when I share recipes I learned from my mother, when I give my opinion on the soap operas we watch together in the afternoons. Yesterday at the supermarket, a lady recognized me and said that Beatrice was offering a reward for anyone who knew my whereabouts. I smiled politely and replied that sometimes people meet when they are ready to meet. I don't feel anger. I don't feel revenge. I don't feel hate. I only feel the peace of someone who made the right decision at the right time. Do you believe that when love is true, it keeps finding ways to come back to us? Beatrice learned in the most painful way possible that mothers also have feelings, that love has limits, and that some doors once closed never open again. Last week I received a very formal letter delivered by a lawyer. It was from Beatrice, typed without tears to smudge the ink, without handwriting trembling with emotion. In that letter, my daughter explained with a coldness that surprised me her reasons for excluding me from the wedding. He said it was a practical decision, that the Tavarisis had insisted on a small ceremony, that she didn't want to hurt my feelings, but also didn't want to create conflict with her new in-laws. There was no recognition of the harm he had caused me. There was no understanding of the sacrifice it had been to raise her alone. There was no gratitude for the years of unconditional love. That letter confirmed something I already knew. The Beatrice I created, the one who promised I would always be the most important person, was gone forever. In her place was a woman who saw our relationship as a social obligation that could be managed efficiently, not as a sacred bond that deserved care and respect. I kept the letter in the wooden box along with the old photos, not out of spite, but because some words just need to be read, not responded to. What would you do if you discovered that the love you gave didn't come back the way you expected? Sometimes, throughout my life, I think about all the women who, like me, spent their lives waiting to be valued by others. I think of mothers who sacrifice their dreams for children who later see them as embarrassing burdens. I think of grandmothers who babysit their grandchildren and are then told they are interfering too much. I think of all of us who learned that our worth depended on how much we could give to others, never on how much we deserved to receive. To all these women, I would say what I now know. It's never too late to choose your own happiness. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to decide that you deserve respect, that you deserve consideration, that you deserve to be treated like the valuable person you've always been. The freedom I feel now wasn't born from punishing Beatrice. It was born from freeing myself. It wasn't born out of revenge. It was born out of self-respect. It wasn't born of hate. It was born of self-love that had been dormant for too many years. Last night, after the community dinner, Donna Mercedes asked me if I ever regretted making that decision. "Don't you miss your daughter?" she asked with the kindness of someone who truly cares about my well-being. I miss the daughter I thought I had, I answered honestly. But I don't miss the relationship we actually had, because that relationship was slowly killing me. It's the purest truth I've ever spoken. For years, I lived in a fantasy where I believed that Beatrice loved me the same way I loved her. The reality is that to Beatrice, I was a convenience when she needed me, and a nuisance when she didn't. Accepting this reality was painful, but it was also liberating. Today, I write these words from my balcony, with the sound of the community garden fountain in the background, with the scent of the bougainvillea I planted last week, with the certainty that I chose the right path. I don't know what the future holds, but I know it will be a future where my happiness won't depend on the decisions of others. Sometimes the greatest recognition is the silence we choose to maintain. And in this silence, Rosa Helena Santos finally found her voice, her strength, and her peace. The woman who got out of that bed one August morning is no longer the same woman who waited patiently to be included in her daughter's life. She is a woman who understood that some absences speak louder than any presence, and that sometimes the greatest love a mother can show is respect for her own dignity. On that silent dawn in Contagium, as the bells of the Church of Our Lady of Mercy rang at 3 a.m., Rosa Helena Santos made the last note in the blue notebook she had started months ago. Today, I no longer wonder what a mother does when she stops being a family. Today, I know the answer. She becomes a family to herself. Did you like the story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can continue bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your kindness. I look forward to hearing your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There are many more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.